Hey everyone. Okay, yeah, so I'm Conor, I'm from Nethermind, and over the last, basically since I started working at Nethermind over a year ago, I've been looking at preconfirmations. And in the last, well, officially in the last 2 weeks, maybe in the last 3 months, I've been working on the economic viability of preconfirmations. And through this work, I've gotten a much clearer idea of what a preconf vision looks like and how it might fit into Ethereum. So I'm going to hopefully share those ideas with you today. Okay, so the outline of the talk today. So my vision is that preconfirmations are inevitable. I know there was some bullish and bearish takes on the main stage a couple of minutes ago, but yeah, I think they're inevitable. And to convince you guys that they're inevitable, I'm going to introduce some popular preconfirmation designs, identify revenue models for each, and then demonstrate that there exists a significant portion of preconfirmation protocols that are economically viable. And I think economic viability is where we can start, and where what's going to kickstart all of this is like showing proposers that they should be running this and that this is better for users. And with that, we're basically going to kickstart a preconfirmation ecosystem. And okay, so my work started looking at the economic viability of preconfirmations, but then I quickly realized that some of the highest revenue protocols were also potentially the most dangerous for the Ethereum ecosystem. So I'm going to discuss some of the likely effects that these protocols might have. The positive ones, how positive are they? But I'm going to focus on the revenue. Oh, sorry, let's skip ahead a few. Skip ahead, okay. And then some of the negative effects. So how can we protect against these? Okay, so again, I've been looking at this for over a year. Justin Drake shared his original post, and he got everybody bullish about preconfirmations, and there's been weekly sequencing calls. And people have sort of felt that we need preconfirmations, but no one has been able to point at something specifically apart from the warm, fuzzy feeling of user experience. So we've got something a little bit more concrete that we're going to base, that we're hopefully going to change the narrative now and show that like this is going to happen, and let's build for this future. So yeah, in terms of what people were believing, right? That there's a UX necessity to compete with alt L1s and blockchains. Like you see some people talking about Solana, the roll-up ecosystem, how everything's moving away from L1, and that preconfs would potentially help with this UX issue. We also hear stuff like shared sequencing, synchronous composability, and a lot of those protocols actually would benefit significantly from having preconfirmations. So that's one of the big things that people think, that with this preconfirmation solutions, we would actually take a step towards composability. And then there's also this maybe less talked about thing, which was the benefit for proposers economically. So then with this research that we've been doing with Nethermind, with the support of Lido, we're actually going to show, we haven't published the results yet, that this is benefiting proposers economically. Okay, so quick primer, just in case anybody doesn't know. I guess hopefully people do know, but a preconfirmation is, okay, we have 12-second slots in Ethereum, and the proposer effectively has a monopoly for those 12 seconds. And with that monopoly, they can provide promises to users that they will include or execute a specific transaction at a specific sequence in the Ethereum block that's going to be upcoming, or just that it will be included at the end of the block. So that's a preconfirmation, inclusion or execution. And I will try and distinguish between the two, but overall, if I say preconfirmation, I probably just mean both. Okay, so again, the main goal of the first part of the talk is going to be showing you that preconfirmations are economically viable. So to do that, I'm going to set the table a little bit here. I'm going to classify preconfirmation protocols. So to talk about this classification, I'm going to think about, okay, Ethereum progresses in slots. That's just a given. That's the way it currently is. And I'm going to consider preconfirmation protocols as progressing in sub-slots. All right, so just like intervals within this slot. And there's 3 entities that I'm going to be interested in. There is the proposer, or the active proposer, which will be specific for a preconfirmation protocol that I will introduce, the active proposer specifically. So the proposer owns the proposal rights for the Ethereum slot, or the remaining Ethereum slot, which I'll describe later. The relayer, who's trusted to run the auction, like Mev Boost, for example, and then the builders who compete to build blocks. So they're going to be the 3 people. Obviously, users are important as well, but for the preconfirmation protocols we're interested in, these are the 3 that are going to matter. Okay, so the classifications that I have, or that we're introducing, we have inclusion-only preconfirmations. So this is like the Bolt team, the Chainbound team with their Bolt protocol, which is just the proposer signing a promise that a transaction will be included somewhere. There is then active proposers signing for preconfs. So within these are sort of execution. So okay, we have the inclusion-only preconfs, and everything else is going to be something related to execution preconfs. So we have independent subslot auctions, such as what's happening with Jito in Solana, Optimism Superchain, and you can even extend this to Polygon, proof of stake. We also then, with this independent subslot auction, we also have something sort of equal but opposite, called dependent subslot auctions, which, although it doesn't exist today, it's sort of it was constructed to describe this gateway design that Justin Drake has sort of been implying or just sort of loosely describing, where it's sort of one person looking at preconfirmations and deciding whether they get included or not, like on a preconfirmation by preconfirmation basis, or sorry, executed. And then there is this other design which I gave a similar talk on this first part on Monday at a Prime Mev conference. So I included Mev commit while I was on the airplane, and I think the results do hold up, and it's interesting to consider Mev commit compared to some of these other protocols. So again, these three classifications broadly describe all of the pre-confirmation protocols, at least the ones that exist. Okay, so independent subslot auctions. Each subslot, the Ethereum proposer runs an auction among a competitive set of builders, and at the end of the slot, they basically collect all of the winning subblocks from each of these subslot auctions. And a key assumption here is that the proposer is a low resource or like can't participate properly in this, which is sort of along the lines of this low resource validator future that we're hoping for. But again, that assumption doesn't necessarily have to hold, but for this work, we assume it does hold. And again, I mentioned these examples already. Then dependent subslot auctions. So each subslot, the active proposer runs an auction to build a subblock and then buy the proposer rights for the remaining subslots. So at the start of the first subslot, the active proposer is the Ethereum proposer, and then after that, the person who wins the subblock auction builds a subblock and then takes over the proposer rights. And then at the end of the protocol, we have some way of enforcing that the Ethereum block just contains all of the subblocks that won the subblock auctions. And as I mentioned, it sort of resembles this gateway design where there's somebody looking at every single preconf and deciding whether it gets included or not based on some oracle pricer. But again, just let's go with the definition that I described in the first 3 lines. Okay, so to maybe try and visualize how these auctions differ. So this independent subslot auction, you just have one proposer running subslot auctions every single subblock, right? So Bob wins the first auction, Bob builds a subblock, Bob gains the value of building that subblock, but he pays some revenue to the proposer Pete, all right? And then Alice wins the second one, Alice wins the third one, Carly wins the fourth. Nothing special about any of these names, it's just there's an auction happening, and those 3 are, so in that order, they're the builders that have the highest value for that subblock at that specific time. But again, Alice is building a subblock on top of the subblock that Bob built, and then in the third subslot, Alice is building a subblock on top of the one that she built in the previous one. But again, it's a competition. Anybody can participate. It just so happens that she had the highest value at that particular time. And then she's paying the revenue to Pete, the proposer. In the dependent subslot auction, Bob is paying for the right to build a subblock, but then again, take over the proposal rights for the remaining subblocks. But he's going to run a dependent subslot auction in the next subslot. And in that case, Alice wins, so Alice takes over, and then again, we run the protocol again. Alice wins the next one because she has the highest valuation, just so happens. So she retains the right to be the active proposer. So again, hopefully you've got a sort of a rough intuition for how these protocols differ, and I'm going to go through a few results now. So to analyze the expected rewards of these protocols, so I'm going to consider Mev Boost plus inclusion preconfs, which is in line with the Bolt design from Chainbound. Independent subslot auctions, dependent subslot auctions, I've introduced those in the previous slides. Mev commit, which again, I'm not going to introduce it properly in this talk, but I'm going to present the results, and although they're interesting, they don't sort of stand on the limit of any of the particular protocols that I introduce. And we're going to analyze all of these without pre-confirmation tips, all right? So pre-confirmation tips are probably going to be a significant driver for these protocols. But we are able to show some very positive results even without pre-confirmation tips. So for each of these, we're going to compare the results to the proposer rewards that MEV Boost generates for proposers. And yeah, we're basically going to sort of create a comparative table for thinking about how these protocols might change proposer revenue. Okay, so first, I introduced a relatively straightforward result about MEV Boost plus inclusion preconfs. So at a high level, it just says that if you're a proposer, you have the ability at each subslot to provide an inclusion preconf or not provide an inclusion preconf. And by not providing an inclusion preconf at every subslot and waiting until the last subslot to run an auction, that is the same as running MEV Boost. All right, so no inclusion preconfs and then just running an auction at the end. That is MEV Boost. So any deviation from that strategy must be at least as profitable as MEV Boost if you're a rational proposer. So we're able to again, this is a sort of a sketch of the proper definition. Again, this theorem requires a couple of more nuances, but high level, it's if you decide to offer an inclusion preconf, it must be because it provides you with revenue greater than or equal to running MEV Boost, because MEV Boost is possible by not providing any inclusion preconfs. Okay, so we can go back to this in the Q&A. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, it's just you have the ability to choose. You're not obligated to provide these inclusion preconfs. So by doing so, you must be increasing your revenue in expectation. Okay, so then to analyze this independent subslot auctions, we weren't able to come up with these sort of nice theoretical results. But more than this, we actually had something relatively specific for how we expect the results to change. So this is a breakdown of the current MEV that's paid to proposers based on the strategy. Right? So we have here remainder, complex, sandwich, liquidation, sexdex, just-in-time sandwiching, and atomic arbitrage. And this remainder part is sort of as a result of priority fees, just like normal user transactions. So this blue part, this 25.6, is actually just sort of random arrival stuff. Everything else sort of grows in time or has some sort of a specific arrival pattern that will change how the rewards are paid to the proposer when we introduce subblocks. And this is what we try to do, right? So I'll get into the methodology now. Okay, so when it comes to sexdex, we actually had this very nice result from Milionis et al., a researcher at Columbia, and he was able to show that on Uniswap, we actually, or like on automated market makers, the sexdex value that can be captured grows sort of super linearly in time. Basically, so we were expecting a graph something like this, that like, okay, at the start you have a small amount of growth, but as you increase the time, you actually get this sort of supercharged growth, but not as supercharged as what we have here. This is an exponential function. So what actually leads to this exponential function is, okay, so on the bottom here we have the number of splits. So as we increase the number of subblocks, we actually get a really steep drop-off in the profit that we expect the proposer to receive. And at a high level, the reason why we're seeing this is because, okay, you have this base, at every given point, the expected profit is, the value of an MEV transaction starts off at 0. Then it grows, and then we basically, at every subblock, we check, is the value of that opportunity greater than the fees? And if it is, we execute it. So the proposer will capture the difference between the value of the opportunity and the fees. But then the value of the opportunity resets to 0 again, right? So the more subblocks we introduce, basically the more granular the builders are able to be with capturing the opportunity. So effectively, the profit margin, the relative ratio of the value that can be captured to the fees that are being paid approaches 0. And this, although we were expecting something like this, we didn't expect it to tend to 0. But again, this is just as a result of simulations, and this exponential curve does tend towards 0. So it seems pretty drastic, but in theory, it probably should hold up something similar to this at least. That like if you basically do continuous time updates for the proposer, the expected profit that you expect to receive, MEV profit that you expect to receive from sexdex will tend to 0. And we actually noticed this trend for all of the MEV opportunities that existed. So this was what was this? This was sandwiching, I think, and basically saying that the same effect was taking place. Now again, we made some simplifying assumptions about how we expected these MEV opportunities to arrive, but overall we still expect the same thing to happen. That like, okay, you have this random arrival of let's say, valuable transactions into the mempool, but with the sort of like effectively continuous time updates that happens when you increase the number of splits, you actually basically capture an MEV transaction or MEV opportunity as soon as it becomes profitable, and don't allow it to sort of grow and become more profitable for a proposer. So the relative amount of fees that you're paying is significantly high, and it tends towards the value of the opportunities. Okay, so overall, we actually came up with this sort of like, we added all of these revenue types together, and we got this equilibrium point as the number of splits increased, which basically found an equilibrium point at the 25%, that blue chunk that you saw of the remainder transactions, which was just the priority fees that users were paying. We don't actually expect those fees to change as the number of splits increase. Well, again, the theory might say that we actually expect these fees to increase if people are paying for preconfirmations, but we assume no preconfirmation tips, and we found this equilibrium point. The full results are available on the Lido forum. I can share that afterwards. Okay, so that was independent subslot auctions. With dependent subslot auctions, we actually had a much nicer result, which showed us that basically with dependent subslot auctions, the revenue of the proposer selling the rights to build a subblock and then transfer the rights of the proposal to the next to the winner of the auction is maximizing the revenue of the proposer. So we tried to visualize this with this graph. Now, I haven't explained this to anybody yet, but hopefully you guys can make sense of it. So we basically, at the start of the Ethereum slot, we have this maximum possible value that can be captured. Now, in reality, this will change. This will sort of change as external forces external prices change. But let's assume it's constant, right? With ISSAs, so ISSAs are represented by this the blue lines and the blue shading, and DSSAs are represented by the red shading. So when ISSA builders are competing to update the state, they're basically trying to capture the maximum value that they can right now. Okay, they're not trying to think about how they can maximize the value of the entire slot, right? But when it comes to DSSAs and the builders that are participating in these dependent subslot auctions, they are trying to simultaneously maximize the value of the subblock plus the value of the remaining subslots. So this is why this red line, this expected value of the red line, stays constant. So this is this is sort of the value that's gained in the first round of the DSSA. It's actually less than the value that's gained in the first round of the ISSA, but the expected value that can be captured throughout the entire subslots stays the same for the DSSAs, while the value is actually being diminished in the ISSAs because the person who wins the auction isn't considering the effect of winning that block on the remaining sub-blocks. And then at the end, basically, the maximum possible value is captured in DSSAs, while basically once you finish the second last subslot, that is basically setting the maximum possible value that can be captured in ISSAs. So I think it captures the intuition, but again, maybe this is too much for one slide. But anyway, you trust me on this for now at least. So again, we're going to try and summarize all of these results that we have for the 4 pre-confirmation protocols that we introduced. So again, this is all without proposer revenue. Let's assume MEV-Boost is sort of this standard, right? MEV-Boost has neutral revenue for the proposer. That's the sort of the decision point. I'm happy with MEV-Boost. Do I want to choose one of these pre-confirmation protocols or not? By pivoting to MEV-Boost plus inclusion preconfs, you are increasing your expected revenue. All right, you're just basically providing yourself with this optional protocol that allows you to receive tips that you wouldn't typically receive from users. When it comes to ISSAs, as I mentioned, you've already seen that the exponential decay. We actually reduce the proposer's revenue without tips again. So tips may actually compensate for that, but we don't know if they will or not at this point. DSSAs, we sort of with the results that I had, that I sort of went over slightly quickly, they were optimal in some sense. And MEV-commit is somewhere in between MEV-boost plus, it's somewhere in between DSSAs and MEV-boost. We don't actually sort of try and find exactly where it will be, because again, all of these protocols depend on tips, and that information we just haven't got right now. Okay, so user experience. So when I originally wrote this table, I didn't include user experience, because user experience is very hard to quantify. But I was like, okay, MEV-boost is slightly worse for revenue, but it's significantly better in terms of pricing ease, trust assumptions, spam prevention, and centralization. So why would people actually think about using this if everything else actually becomes worse? And it was all down to user experience. And this is going to be the key thing that's going to maybe drive our proposers to going from one protocol to another. And this is almost the hardest thing to quantify. So in that sense, like, as a proposer, you're probably better off maybe sliding along the graph. Okay, what do I have here in terms of pricing ease, trust assumptions, spam prevention, and centralization? Well, you can see that DSSAs, although they are maximizing, in some sense, user experience and maximizing proposer revenue without tips, they're actually really, really bad for pricing, spam prevention, trust assumptions, and centralization. So it would be a significant risk for proposers and for the Ethereum ecosystem to jump to that point, right? MEV-boost plus inclusion preconfs looks like a really nice sort of compromise in terms of increasing revenue, increasing user experience, while only taking small sort of like slightly worse assumptions with regard to, or slightly worse steps with regard to pricing, ease, and trust assumptions, right? Now these trust assumptions are only slightly worse than MEV-boost, but again, still, like, if we want to do this properly, we probably do need some sort of intermediate relayer that's doing things sort of more regularly and in a more trusted way than MEV-boost. But again, these are up for debate, and it's just maybe to give you guys some intuition as to how these protocols compare. Okay, so things to notice from the scale. So most of these preconf protocols immediately increase revenue. With preconfirmation tips, this will increase further. All of the preconfirmation protocols that we identified require increased trust assumptions. Again, the increased trust assumptions versus MEV-boost. And the highest revenue protocols are the most centralizing. All right, so although preconfirmations potentially like skyrocket revenue for proposers, they also carry significant meta risk. And again, the higher the revenue, probably it's almost a one-to-one correlation with the increased risk, and not only for the proposers but also for the Ethereum ecosystem, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got a lot of cash, a lot of potential revenue here, but with all of the high revenue protocols, we're also introducing more risk. So what can we do against all of this revenue that's potentially available for proposers? So the easiest thing we can do is insist on open source interoperable designs. So no lock-in. Again, I was having a conversation outside earlier on with someone from Chainlink, ECAS, and they were saying that like open source interoperable designs, like as in no vendor lock-in, are going to be extremely important, especially when we're in this discovery phase of what works, what doesn't work. Again, an ability to pivot from specific preconfirmation protocols will be extremely important. Implementations driven by research. So we all have a sort of there is always pressure to ship, but it's very important, especially considering I am from a research company, that we do. I'm probably biased, that we do try and let research drive some of the implementation decisions that we choose. So fast implementation is good, but optimized, well understood implementation is definitely better. So next, okay, so these are the easy things to do, right? We have the research resources, we have the open source interoperable designs, or we know what they look like. Something harder is inclusion lists. So inclusion lists can help, even if, okay, some of these preconfirmation protocols on the sort of the more dangerous side of centralization, they can still be, they're still possible. We can still allow for these things, but we will need some way to ensure that the Ethereum chain remains censorship resistant. So inclusion lists will be a really nice step, or a really important step in that regard, regardless of who we think is sequencing our blocks. If we're introducing preconfirmation protocols into the system, we're taking a trust assumption hit, we're taking a centralization risk. We need to make sure that inclusion lists are there so that even if things start to slide away from us as decentralized maxis, we have the ability to always make sure that the chain is as credibly neutral as possible. Okay, and then the hard part here, or at least one of the hard things that I mentioned that I'm going to discuss, is a tested proposer separation. Well, at least there's a good chance that a tested proposer separation will help isolate the effects of this centralization and these increased trust assumptions. All right, so that even if we are basically causing a proposer set to be highly centralized because of the revenue that is out there and available, like if the APY of our offering preconfirmations is 7% versus not of 3%, we will expect validators to move towards offering preconfirmations, but some of these designs require serious sophistication that we just cannot expect from solar stakers. So we have designs for this, but again, this is not exhaustive, and a lot of these protocols require further research. And here's just a couple of examples. Execution tickets or execution auctions, depending on who you talk to from Ethereum Foundation, appointed execution proposers, which is a bit of a slightly different take on tested proposer separation from Nethermind, and rainbow staking, sort of maybe just a general tested proposer separation protocol. And then again, there's probably others. Okay, so preconfirmation protocols, like I was saying, they are inevitable. So we need to make sure that we're doing all that we can to understand what we can do against all this revenue and all the risks that it brings, and basically, yeah, we don't know what they are. That's one of the beauties of research, that we have to go out and do it. But again, the important thing is that we are doing that research. And Nethermind are doing that research. We are doing it right now with PBS Foundation support, and yeah, it's ongoing. So yes, the research is ongoing. I'm always happy to talk about preconfirmations and base rollups. So be free to get in touch. And yeah, thanks very much for your time.